If he read it, I'm actually going to die. That was the first thought in my head as I stared at my phone, frozen on my bed, the screen lighting up my entire dark room like it was exposing every bad decision I had ever made. Because there it was, right there in brutal, undeniable text, the message I was never supposed to send, the message I had written as a draft, a stupid, emotional, late-night confession that was supposed to stay buried in my notes app forever. Except it didn't, because I sent it. I actually sent it to Lucas Hale of all people. And now it sat there in our chat like a ticking bomb. Long, honest, humiliating. Every word screaming I like you in a way that made my stomach twist. And then, as if the universe decided to personally ruin me, the word appeared under it, seen, and my heart dropped so fast it felt like I'd missed a step on a staircase. No. No, no, no. I whispered out loud, scrambling upright, my fingers already flying across the screen as panic took over every rational thought I had left, typing and deleting and typing again. Wait, that wasn't meant for you. Delete. Wrong chat lol. Delete. Ignore that. Send. Immediately followed by seriously ignore that. Which somehow made it worse, so much worse, because now it looked exactly like what it was. A real confession desperately being covered up by the worst lies imaginable. And I could practically feel my soul leaving my body as I stared at the screen, waiting, praying, begging for anything, a reply, a reaction, even a simple what would have been better than this. But instead I got nothing, just silence, thick and suffocating, the kind that made every second stretch out until it felt like minutes, like I was sitting in the middle of a quiet room with a clock ticking way too loud. And then the typing bubble appeared, those three little dots that somehow held my entire future in them, and my breath caught, my whole body going still as I leaned forward like that would somehow make the reply come faster. Okay, I whispered. Okay, just say something normal, something casual, something that doesn't destroy my life. But the dots disappeared, just vanished, leaving the screen blank again. No message, no explanation, nothing, and somehow that was worse, so much worse, because now my brain filled in every possible scenario. He read it and hated it. He read it and laughed. He read it and screenshotted it and sent it to someone else. And I pressed my palm to my forehead, groaning softly. I need to move states. I need a new name. I need to disappear. I muttered, pacing across my tiny apartment, the hardwood floor cool under my bare feet, as my phone stayed clenched in my hand like it might explode. And just when I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, if I stayed quiet long enough this would somehow undo itself, my phone buzzed again, sharp and sudden, and I froze mid-step, staring at the notification like it might bite me. Lucas Hale, one new message, and my heart slammed against my ribs as I slowly, carefully, like I was defusing a bomb, tapped it open, only to feel the world tilt slightly when I read it. Just 4 words, simple, calm, and absolutely terrifying. I'm outside. I did not move at first. I could not. My brain refusing to process the words sitting on my screen like they belonged to someone else. I am outside. I read it again, slower this time. Like maybe the sentence would rearrange itself into something less terrifying. Something like, just kidding, or wrong chat. But it did not. It stayed exactly the same. Calm and direct, and completely impossible. Because outside meant outside my apartment, outside my building, outside my door, and that meant Lucas Hale was here. Actually here, 10 minutes after I sent the most humiliating message of my entire life. No. I whispered, shaking my head as if that alone could undo reality. There is no way, but my heart was already racing again, louder this time, heavier, like it knew something I did not want to admit. And then, as if to confirm it, there was a knock, soft, steady, deliberate, not loud, not aggressive, just 3 slow taps that echoed through my apartment and straight into my chest. And I froze, every muscle locking in place, my phone still in my hand, my breath caught somewhere between inhale and panic. That is not him. I muttered under my breath, backing up a step like distance could somehow protect me. That could be anyone. Except it could not, because no one else would show up like this. No one else would knock like that. Like they already knew I was standing here, listening, and my gaze drifted toward the door as if it had its own gravity, pulling me in whether I wanted it or not. Another knock followed. Same rhythm, same patience, and my stomach flipped so hard I had to press a hand against it. "Okay," I whispered, pacing in a tight circle, my bare feet sliding slightly against the floor. "Okay, think. You can pretend you are not home. You can just stay quiet. He will leave. People leave when no one answers. That is how doors work." But even as I said it, I knew it would not be that simple. Not with him. Not with Lucas, who never did anything halfway, who always moved like he already knew the outcome before anyone else even realized there was a game. My phone buzzed again, sharp and sudden, and I flinched, glancing down at the screen with dread curling tight in my chest. Another message. Of course there was another message, and I almost did not open it. Almost convinced myself that ignorance was safer, but I tapped it anyway, because of course I did. And there it was, just as controlled as the first. Ethan. My name, spelled out like he was saying it out loud. Like he was right there on the other side of the door, which he was. "I know you are inside." And my breath hitched, my entire body going still, as something warm and terrifying curled low in my chest. Because he was right. I was here, hiding, pretending this was not happening. Pretending I had not just told him everything I had been too afraid to say for months. And now he was here, not texting, not calling. Here, waiting, and another knock followed, slightly firmer this time. Not impatient, just certain, like he had already decided how this was going to end. And I swallowed hard, staring at the door like it might open on its own, my hand tightening around my phone until my knuckles went pale. "You do not have to open it," I whispered to myself, but my feet had already taken a step forward, then another, drawn in despite every instinct telling me to run. And just as I reached the door, his voice came. Through the wood, low, steady, close enough that I could almost feel it. "Ethan," he said again, softer this time. "Open the door." My hand hovered inches from the doorknob, fingers trembling like they did not belong to me, like they were waiting for permission my brain refused to give. And on the other side of that thin piece of wood stood Lucas Hale, real, present, breathing the same air just a few feet away, and all I had to do was turn the handle, just a small movement, barely any effort at all, but it felt impossible. Like opening that door would mean opening everything I had tried so hard to keep locked inside. "Say something," I whispered to myself, my voice barely audible, because the silence was unbearable now, thick and heavy and stretching between us. And if I did not break it, he would, and somehow that felt worse, my throat dry as I forced out words that sounded nothing like how I imagined they would. "You should go," I said, the sentence weak and uneven, and there was a pause on the other side, not long, just enough to make my heart stutter, and then his voice came again, closer this time, lower, calm in a way that made everything inside me twist tighter. "No," he said simply, not harsh, not loud, just certain, like the word itself had weight, like it settled into the space between us and refused to move, and I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the knob without turning it. It was a mistake. I rushed out, the words tripping over each other, desperate, messy. That message, I did not mean to send it. I was just typing. It was not supposed to go to you. And even as I said it, I knew how it sounded, thin and transparent and painfully unconvincing, because the truth was still sitting there in our chat, unedited, unfiltered, everything I had been too scared to say out loud. And the silence returned for half a second before he spoke again, softer now, but sharper somehow. "Then say that again," he said, and my breath caught, my heart skipping hard enough to make me dizzy. "Say it was not meant for me." And I opened my mouth, ready to repeat the lie, ready to cling to it like it might save me, but nothing came out, not a single word, because something in his voice made it impossible, like he was not just asking, like he was waiting, expecting. And I leaned my forehead lightly against the door, eyes squeezed shut, feeling the cool surface press back against me as my thoughts spiraled, because this was worse than anything I had imagined, worse than being ignored, worse than being rejected. This was him standing here, forcing the truth into the open without raising his voice, without stepping inside, just by being there. And my hand finally moved, not fully, just enough to rest against the handle properly, my fingers curling around it as my pulse hammered in my ears. "Lucas," I said, his name barely steady, barely controlled, and on the other side there was a quiet shift, like he had leaned closer, like he was listening more carefully now. And the realization hit me all at once, sharp, and unavoidable. He did not come here to leave. He did not come here to pretend this never happened. He came here for an answer, and the door between us suddenly felt thinner, fragile, like it was the only thing holding everything back. And before I could stop myself, before I could think of another excuse or another lie, my hand turned the knob just slightly, the latch clicking softly in the quiet space, and my breath caught as I felt the door give under my grip. Not fully open, just enough to break the barrier, just enough to let something change. The door opened just a few inches, and that was enough for me to see him, enough for everything in my chest to completely forget how to function, because Lucas Hale was standing right there, close enough that I could see the faint crease between his brows, the way his eyes locked onto mine immediately, like he had been waiting for this exact moment, like there had never been any doubt I would open the door. And for a second neither of us moved, the hallway lights spilling into my apartment, cutting a thin line across the floor between us, and I realized I was still holding the door, like it might slam shut if I let go, like this could still be undone, but it could not. It was already happening. You came, I said, and the words sounded stupid the second they left my mouth, because obviously he came. He was standing here, breathing, real, and his gaze flicked briefly to my hand on the door before returning to my face, steady, unreadable in that way that had always driven me insane. You told me to go, he replied, his voice calm, even, but there was something under it now, something tighter, more focused, and I swallowed, shifting my weight slightly as the door opened just a little more without me meaning to, reducing the space between us by inches that suddenly felt very noticeable. I thought you would not actually show up, I admitted, because lying again felt pointless now, felt impossible under the way he was looking at me, like he could see straight through every word I tried to hide behind, and one corner of his mouth lifted just slightly, not quite a smile, more like a quiet acknowledgement. You sent a confession, he said, and my heart dropped straight to my stomach again, the word hanging in the air between us like it had weight, like it pressed down on everything else. People usually do not follow that with just kidding, and I let out a small, breathless sound that might have been a laugh if it were not so close to panic. I told you, it was not supposed to go to you, I said quickly, clinging to the same weak defense even though it sounded worse every time I repeated it, and his expression did not change. If anything, it sharpened slightly, his eyes narrowing just enough to make my pulse spike. Then who was it for? He asked, and the question landed harder than it should have. Simple, direct, impossible to answer without unraveling everything. And I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything, but nothing came out again, because there was no version of that answer that did not lead right back to him. And the silence stretched, not awkward this time, not empty, but full, charged, like something was building under the surface. And he took a small step forward, not crossing the threshold, just enough to close the gap further. And suddenly the space between us felt almost non-existent, the air shifting, warmer, heavier, and my grip on the door tightened instinctively, like I needed something solid to hold on to. Ethan, he said, quieter now, my name sounding different in his voice, this close, less distant, more deliberate, and my chest tightened in response, every nerve suddenly too aware. Look at me. And I already was. But something about the way he said it made me straighten slightly, made me meet his gaze fully instead of glancing away like I usually did. And for a moment neither of us spoke, the quiet stretching again, but this time it felt like a countdown, like something inevitable was about to happen. And then he exhaled softly, almost like he had been holding it in, and said, if it was not meant for me, his voice steady, controlled, then why did you write my name? The question hit harder than anything else he had said so far, simple and precise, cutting straight through every excuse I had tried to build. And for a second I just stood there, completely still, my mind scrambling for something, anything, that could pull me out of this. But there was nothing left, no clever deflection, no safe answer, because he was right. I had written his name, not once, not by accident, but clearly, intentionally, like I wanted him to see it even if I told myself I did not. And my grip on the door tightened as I felt my pulse spike, loud and unsteady in my ears. I did not mean to, I said anyway, the words weaker now, thinner, like even I did not believe them anymore. And his gaze did not shift, did not soften. If anything, it focused more, like he was narrowing in on the truth I kept trying to dodge. "Ethan," he said again, quieter, not impatient, just firm, like he was giving me one more chance to stop running, and something in my chest twisted at the sound of my name like that, steady, grounded, like he was not going anywhere until I answered him. And the silence stretched between us again, but this time it felt different, heavier, like it was waiting for me, not him, and I swallowed hard, my throat tight as I looked down for half a second, just enough to break the intensity of his gaze, just enough to breathe. But even that felt like a mistake, because the moment I looked back up, he was still there, still watching, still expecting, and I realized there was no way out of this except through it. No way to undo what I had already said except to say it again, but this time out loud, this time with him standing right in front of me, and the thought made my chest ache in a way that was both terrifying and impossible to ignore, because it was you. I said before I could stop myself, the words slipping out uneven, quieter than I intended but still loud enough to fill the space between us, and everything went still, the hallway, the room, even my own breathing for a second as I realized what I had just admitted, not fully, not everything, but enough to shatter whatever flimsy cover I had left, and his expression shifted just slightly, so small I almost missed it, a flicker of something softer, something real, and my heart lurched in response, unsure whether to hope or panic. That message. I continued, my voice unsteady now, my fingers loosening slightly on the door as I forced myself to keep going, because stopping now would only make it worse. I was not sending it to anyone else. I just was not supposed to send it at all. And the truth settled between us, raw and exposed and impossible to take back. And for a moment he did not say anything, just looked at me like he was processing it, like he was measuring something I could not see. And the quiet stretched again, but it did not feel suffocating this time. It felt fragile, like whatever happened next could tip everything one way or the other. And I shifted slightly, my shoulder brushing the edge of the door as I realized how close he was now, how little space there actually was between us, just a few inches and a thin line of air that suddenly felt charged with something I could not name, and I exhaled slowly, trying to steady myself, trying to prepare for whatever he was about to say, whether it was rejection, confusion, or something worse. And then he moved, just slightly, just enough to close that last bit of distance without crossing the threshold, his hand lifting but not touching the door, not touching me, just hovering there like he was holding himself back on purpose, and his voice dropped, softer but somehow more intense than before. "Then why hide it?" he asked, his eyes still locked on mine. "If it was always meant for me." The question lingered in the air between us, quiet but impossible to ignore, and for a moment I just stared at him, my mind scrambling again, not for excuses this time, but for something honest enough to match the weight of what he was asking. Because there was no easy answer to that. No clean explanation that did not make me sound exactly as vulnerable as I felt. And I let out a slow breath, my shoulders dropping slightly as the fight drained out of me. "Because I did not think you would want it," I admitted, the words coming out softer than anything I had said so far. And the moment they left my mouth, I felt something shift, not outside, not in the hallway or the room, but inside me, like I had finally said the part one was most afraid of, and his expression changed again, more noticeable this time, the tension in his jaw easing just slightly, his eyes searching mine in a way that made my chest tighten all over again. "You did not think I would want it," he repeated, not mocking, not dismissive, just considering it, like he was turning the idea over in his mind, and I shook my head once, a small, almost helpless motion. "You never give anything away," I said, my voice steadier now, even if my heart was still racing. "You show up, you say exactly what you need to say, and then you leave, like none of it matters, like nothing sticks." And I swallowed, forcing myself to keep going even as the words felt too revealing, too close to everything I had been trying to hide. "I did not know where I stood with you, and I was not going to risk saying something that could ruin whatever this is." I gestured vaguely between us, the space that had always been filled with something unspoken, something I never quite understood, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was heavy with everything I had just put into it, every uncertainty, every quiet moment I had overanalyzed, every time I had convinced myself that what I felt was one-sided. And he did not interrupt, did not dismiss it, just listened, which somehow made it harder, because now I had nowhere to hide, and I became suddenly aware of how close we were again, how the open door was no longer a barrier but a frame, holding us in this moment with no easy exit, and I shifted slightly, my shoulder brushing the edge of it as I let out another breath, quieter this time. So I kept it to myself. I finished, my gaze dropping for a second before I forced it back up to meet his, because if I had come this far, I could not back out now, and for a moment he did not move, did not speak, just stood there looking at me like he was seeing something new, something he had not expected, and then he exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, but enough to break the stillness. And he took a small step forward, not enough to enter, not enough to cross that invisible line, but enough to make the distance between us feel even thinner, almost non-existent, and his voice, when he spoke again, was quieter than before, lower, like it belonged only in this space. "You think I leave because nothing matters," he said, and there was something different in his tone now, something that made my pulse spike all over again. Or because I am trying not to stay longer than I should, and my breath caught, the implication of that settling into me slower than everything else, heavier, and I blinked at him, caught off guard, my thoughts stumbling as I tried to catch up. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now, and he held my gaze, steady and unflinching, like he had already decided he was done holding back, and the air between us shifted again, charged in a different way now, less like tension and more like something on the edge of becoming real. And for the first time since he knocked on my door, I felt something other than panic start to take over, something quieter but just as overwhelming, as I realized this was not just about what I had said, it was about what he had not said until now. The words lingered between us, heavier now, charged with something I had not expected when I opened the door, and I could feel it settling into my chest, slow and unmistakable. The realization that this was no longer just about my confession, it was about him too, about everything he had never said until now. And I swallowed, my pulse still uneven as I searched his face for something to hold on to, something to make sense of what he just implied. Trying not to stay, I repeated quietly, the phrase feeling unfamiliar on my tongue, like it belonged to a different version of him than the one I thought I knew. And his gaze did not waver, did not retreat. If anything, it steadied, like he was done avoiding whatever this was becoming. "You think I do not notice things," he said, his voice low, controlled, but there was a shift in it now, something more open, something less guarded than before, and I felt my breath catch again, my body going still as I listened, really listened this time instead of panicking through every word. "You think I show up, say what I need, and leave," he continued, taking another small step forward, closing what little space remained until I could feel the warmth of him even without contact. "But you never asked why I keep coming back," and that hit somewhere deeper than everything else, quiet but direct, like it slipped past every defense I had and settled somewhere I could not ignore. And I blinked, my thoughts scrambling again, but not in panic this time, in confusion, in something closer to hope that I did not quite trust yet. "Because you have to," I said automatically, the first explanation that came to mind, weak and unconvincing even to me, and one corner of his mouth lifted again, not amused, not dismissive, just knowing. "No," he said simply, and the certainty in that single word made my chest tighten. "I do not have to." And the silence that followed was different again, softer somehow, but more intense, like the air between us was holding something fragile and important at the same time, and I became acutely aware of everything, the way my hand was still resting on the door, the slight brush of my shoulder against the frame, the steady rhythm of his breathing just a few inches away, and my own heart trying to keep up with it. And I swallowed, my voice quieter now, almost uncertain. "Then why do you?" I asked, because I needed to know, because if I did not ask now I never would, and his eyes held mine for a long second, longer than before, like he was deciding something, like he was weighing whether to say it or keep it the way it had always been, unspoken and safe. And then he exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing just enough to notice, and when he spoke, his voice dropped even lower, softer but clearer than anything he had said yet. "Because you matter," he said, and the words landed in my chest with a weight that made everything else fall quiet, my thoughts, my panic, even the noise. of the world outside the apartment, all of it fading into the background as I tried to process something that simple, something that direct, and my breath caught, my fingers loosening slightly on the door without me realizing it. "You always have," he added, just as steady, just as certain, and something in my chest twisted, sharp, and overwhelming in a way I could not immediately name. Because I had spent so long convincing myself the opposite that hearing this felt almost unreal, and I shook. My head slightly, not in denial but in disbelief, my voice barely there when I finally spoke again. "You never said anything." And he did not look away, did not hesitate this time. "Neither did you," he replied, and the truth in that settled between us just as firmly as everything else, quiet but undeniable. And for a moment we just stood there, inches apart, both of us on the edge of something that had been building long before this night, long before that message, and I realized, with a slow, steady certainty, that opening the door had not been the real turning point. This moment right here, where neither of us was pretending anymore. The silence that followed did not feel empty anymore. It felt full, like every unspoken thing we had been carrying finally had space to exist between us, and I stood there, inches away from him, trying to steady my breathing, trying to understand how everything had shifted so quickly from panic to something deeper, something I did not know how to handle yet, because hearing him say that I mattered, that I always had, it did not just erase the fear, it replaced it with something heavier, something real, and I could feel it settling in my chest, warm and overwhelming at the same time. And I swallowed, my voice quieter now, more careful. "Then why did you never say anything?" I asked, because that question had been sitting in the back of my mind for longer than I wanted to admit, and he did not answer right away, his gaze steady, thoughtful, like he was choosing his words instead of letting them slip out the way I had. And that alone told me this meant something to him too, more than he was used to showing. And I watched the subtle shift in his expression, the way his shoulders relaxed just slightly, the way his focus stayed entirely on me, like there was nothing else in the world pulling his attention away. And when he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, less controlled, more honest. "Because I was not sure you would want me to," he said, and for a second I just blinked at him, the words taking a moment to fully register, because they mirrored mine so closely it almost felt unreal, like we had been standing on opposite sides of the same thought this entire time without realizing it. And I let out a small, breathless laugh, not because it was funny, but because the realization hit all at once, sharp and undeniable. "So we both just said nothing," I said, and he gave a slight nod, something almost amused flickering in his eyes. "Looks like it," he replied, and the tension between us shifted again, lighter now, but still charged, like something fragile had been uncovered and neither of us wanted to break it by moving too fast, and I became aware of the way I was still standing half behind the door, like I had not fully decided whether to let him in or keep him out, and the thought made something in me settle, a quiet decision forming before I even fully processed it. And without looking away from him, I pushed the door open a little more, just enough to remove the last barrier between us, just enough to make it clear that I was not hiding anymore. And his eyes flicked briefly to the movement before returning to my face, something softer appearing there now, something that made my chest tighten in a completely different way. And for a moment neither of us spoke again, the space between us no longer tense in the same way, but still intense, still close. And I shifted slightly, my hand dropping from the door now that it was fully open, my fingers brushing against my side as I tried to find the right words, the right way to say something that felt too big to come out clean. I meant what I said, I admitted finally, my voice steady despite the way my heart was racing, and his gaze sharpened just slightly at that. Not surprised, not confused, just focused, like this was the part he had been waiting for, and I held his eyes, refusing to look away this time, refusing to hide behind hesitation again. "All of it," I added, quieter now, but no less certain, and the words settled between us like a promise, like a line I could not take back even if I wanted to. And for a second nothing happened, the moment stretching just enough to make me wonder what he would do with that, how he would respond now that everything was out in the open. And then he moved, not abruptly, not overwhelming, just one small step forward that brought him fully into my space, crossing the threshold without hesitation, and my breath caught as the distance between us disappeared completely, the shift subtle but undeniable, and his voice, when he spoke again, was low, steady, and closer than it had ever been. "Then say it again," he said, his eyes locked on mine, leaving no room to retreat. Not in a message this time. The words settled between us, heavier now that there was no distance left to soften them, and I could feel the weight of what he was asking pressing in from every side. Because this time there was no screen, no delay, no chance to type and delete and rewrite until it felt safe. This was real, immediate, unavoidable, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might give me away before I even spoke. "Say it again," he had said, and I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry as I tried to gather. The same words that had come so easily in the quiet of my room, but now felt impossible under his gaze, and I realized this was the part one had been avoiding all along, not just sending it, not just admitting it, but saying it out loud where it could not be softened or taken back, and for a second I hesitated, my eyes flicking away from his before I forced them back, because if I broke now, if I looked away, I knew I would lose whatever fragile courage I had left, and he noticed, of course he did, his expression shifting just slightly, not impatient, not pushing, just waiting, giving me the space to either step forward or retreat, and that somehow made it harder, because he was not forcing this out of me, he was letting me choose it, and I took a slow breath, steadying myself, my hands unconsciously curling at my sides as I tried to ground myself in something solid. "I like you," I said finally, the words coming out quieter than I intended but clear enough to fill the space between us. And for a moment everything seemed to pause, like the air itself was holding still, and I felt my chest tighten as I watched his reaction, searching for any sign of how that landed, whether it was enough, whether it was too much, whether it changed. Anything at all. But his gaze did not shift, did not pull away. If anything it deepened, like he was listening more closely now, like he was not done yet. And something in me pushed forward, something that had been building since the moment I opened the door, refusing to let me stop halfway. "I have for a while," I added, my voice steadier now, stronger, even as my pulse refused to slow down, and I exhaled slowly, the tension in my shoulders easing just a fraction as the truth settled fully into the space between us, no longer hidden, no longer implied, just there, simple and undeniable. And the silence that followed was different again, not tense, not fragile, but expectant, like something else was about to happen, something I could not quite predict, and he did not respond right away, did not interrupt, just watched me for a second longer, like he was taking it in, like he was making sure he understood exactly what I meant, and then he moved, just slightly, just enough to shift the space between us in a way that made my breath catch again, his presence closer, more certain, and his voice, when he spoke, was quieter than before, but carried more weight than anything else he had said tonight. "That is not what you wrote," he said, and my heart skipped, my breath catching at the implication behind those words, because he was right. That was not all I had written, not even close, and I felt heat rise to my face as I realized what he was asking for. Not just a confession, but the full truth, the version I had tried to hide even from myself, and I shook my head slightly, a nervous, almost disbelieving motion. "You are really not going to make this easy for me, are you?" I muttered, and something almost amused flickered in his expression, brief but real, before it settled back into that steady focus that made everything else fade out, and he held my gaze, unwavering. "You already said it once," he replied, calm, certain, like there was no doubt in his mind that I could do it again. "Do not take it back now." And the words landed softly but firmly, and I felt something shift inside me again, something steadier this time, less afraid, more certain, and I took another breath, deeper than before, my eyes staying locked on his as I prepared to say the part one had been avoiding, the part that would change everything the moment it left my mouth. The moment stretched thin, balanced on the edge of something that could not be undone, and I felt it in every part of me. In the way my chest rose and fell a little too fast, in the way my hands tightened slightly at my sides, in the way his gaze did not waver even for a second, like he was giving me no place to hide, but also no reason to run, and I realized that was the difference now. I was not being pushed, I was being seen, fully, completely, and that made it harder and easier at the same time. And I took a slow breath, letting it fill my lungs, letting it steady me just enough to keep going. Because I knew if I stopped here, if I softened it again, I would regret it. I did not just say that I like you. I said, my voice quiet but clear, and I watched the way his expression shifted, subtle but attentive, like he was listening for every word, not just hearing them but taking them in. And that gave me just enough courage to continue. I said, I think about you all the time. I admitted, the words heavier now, more personal, but I did not look away. I did not let myself retreat into hesitation again. Even when I try not to, even when it does not make sense, you are just there. And I exhaled slowly, feeling something in my chest loosen as the truth settled fully between us, raw and unfiltered. And I swallowed, my pulse still uneven but no longer overwhelming. I said, I notice everything about you. I continued, my voice steadier now, stronger with each word. The way you pause before you answer something serious. The way you always show up exactly when you say you will. The way you leave before anything gets too real. And his eyes flickered slightly at that. Not defensive, not distant, just aware, like he knew exactly what I meant. And I felt something shift again, something grounding, something that kept me moving forward instead of pulling back. And I said it. Matters. I added, softer now, but no less certain. All of it matters to me, more than it probably should. And the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, steady, like the space between us had finally caught up to everything we had been holding back. And I held his gaze, refusing to break this time, refusing to undo what I had just said by looking away. And for a second nothing changed, the world outside still quiet, the room still, everything paused in this moment that felt bigger than anything that had come before it. And then he moved, just slightly, enough to shift the air between us again, closer without touching, present in a way that made my breath catch all over again. And his voice, when he spoke, was lower now, softer but more certain than anything he had said so far. That sounds a lot like more than just liking me, he said, and there was no teasing in it, no deflection, just a quiet acknowledgement of what I had finally put into words. And I let out a small breath, something almost like a laugh, but not quite, because he was right. Of course he was right. And there was no point pretending otherwise anymore, not after everything I had already said. And I nodded slightly. The movement small but deliberate. Yeah, I said, my voice steady now despite the way my heart still refused to slow down. It is, and the admission settled between us like something solid, something that did not need to be explained any further. And for a moment we just stood there, both of us fully in it now. No more guessing, no more silence, just the truth, simple and undeniable. And I realized this was it. This was the point where everything could shift completely, depending on what he chose to do next. And I felt that anticipation build quietly in my chest, not as panic this time, but as something sharper, something hopeful, as I waited for his answer. The silence after my words did not break immediately. And that was the hardest part, not knowing, standing there with everything exposed and nothing left to hide behind. My heart beat loud in my ears as I watched him, waiting, searching his face for any sign of what he was thinking. But Lucas did not rush, he never did. He just stood there, steady and grounded like he always was, his gaze locked on mine in a way that made it impossible to look away. And for a moment I wondered if I had said too much, if I had crossed some invisible line that could not be uncrossed. But then he exhaled slowly, the sound quiet but deliberate, like he was letting something go, and his expression shifted, not drastically, just enough to make my chest tighten in anticipation. You think I did not notice, he said, his voice low, calm, but there was something underneath it now, something that felt closer to honesty than anything he had given me before, and I blinked, caught off guard by the direction he was taking, my thoughts scrambling to keep up as he continued. You think I did not see the way you look at me, or the way you always stay a little longer when I am around? And my breath caught, the words landing with a quiet precision that made it clear he had been paying attention this whole time, more than I ever realized, and I felt a rush of heat rise to my face, not from embarrassment this time, but from the realization that I had not been as invisible as I thought, that maybe, just maybe, this had not been one-sided after all. And he took a small step closer, not abrupt, not overwhelming, just enough to make the space between us feel even more real, even more present. "I noticed," he said simply, and the weight of that settled into me in a way that made my chest feel too tight and too light at the same time. And I swallowed, my voice quieter now, almost uncertain despite everything I had already admitted. "Then why did you not say anything?" I asked, because I needed to hear it. Needed to understand why we had both stood on opposite sides of the same truth without crossing over. And he held my gaze for a long second, longer than before, like he was deciding how much to give me, how much to let me see. And then he answered, his voice softer but steady, "Because I was not sure you were ready to hear it." And the words settled between us with a different kind of weight, not heavy in a painful way, but in a way that made everything feel more real, more intentional, and I felt my breath catch again, my mind trying to process what he meant, because that sounded like something more, something that went beyond simple confusion or mistiming. And I frowned slightly, not in frustration but in focus, ready to hear what I asked, my voice barely above a whisper now. And he did not hesitate this time, did not look away or soften it. He just met my gaze fully, like he had already decided he was done holding back. And when he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear, each word deliberate. "That I have been trying not to cross a line you were not ready for." And my heart stuttered hard at that, the meaning settling in slowly but undeniably. And I felt something shift inside me again, something deeper than the panic that had started all of this, something steadier, stronger. And I took a small breath, my voice softer now but more certain than before. "And now," I said, the question hanging there without needing to be fully spoken. And he held my gaze, unwavering, his expression calm but no longer distant, no longer unreadable. And for the first time since he showed up at my door, I could see it clearly, not just in what he said but in the way he stayed, in the way he looked at me like he had nowhere else he needed to be. "Now," he repeated quietly, "you opened the door." The words lingered in the air, soft but undeniable, and I felt them settle somewhere deep in my chest, heavier than anything else he had said tonight. Because it was not just about the door, not really. It was about everything that came with it, everything I had finally stopped hiding. And I stood there for a moment, just looking at him, trying to process how something so simple could change everything so completely. And my breath came out slower this time, steadier, like my body was finally catching up to what my mind had already started to accept. "I did," I said quietly, my voice no longer shaking the way it had before. And he did not move, did not interrupt, just watched me like he was giving me the space to understand it on my own. And that made something in me settle, something that had been restless since the moment I saw that message marked as seen. And I realized I was not panicking anymore. Not in the same way. The fear had shifted into something else, something more grounded, more real. And I took a small step forward without thinking, closing whatever invisible distance I had still been holding on to. And his eyes followed the movement, steady and focused, like he noticed everything even when he did not say it out loud. And I let out a quiet breath, my gaze holding his. "So what happens now?" I asked, because the question felt unavoidable, not out of doubt, but out of need. Because this moment could not just stay suspended forever, it had to move somewhere, become something. And he did not answer right away, his expression thoughtful but no longer guarded, like he was not trying to calculate the safest response anymore, like he was just here, with me. And that alone felt different. And after a second he shifted slightly, his posture relaxing in a way I had never really seen before, like he was letting go of something he had been holding on to for a long time. And when he spoke, his voice was low, steady, but softer than anything he had given me before. "That depends," he said, and my heart skipped, the words pulling my attention sharper, more focused, "on whether you meant what you said enough to not take it back tomorrow." And the question landed gently but firmly, not accusing, not doubting, just real. And I felt a small, almost disbelieving breath leave me, because out of everything I expected, that was not it, not hesitation, not distance, but a kind of quiet caution that made it clear this mattered to him too, more than he was used to admitting. And I shook my head, slightly, the answer coming easier this time, without the same hesitation that had held me back before. "I am not taking it back," I said, my voice steady, certain in a way that surprised even me. And his gaze softened just slightly at that, the tension in his shoulders easing another fraction. and for a moment neither of us spoke, the silence settling into something calm instead of uncertain, something that felt like a beginning instead of a question, and I became aware of how close we were. Again, how natural it felt now instead of overwhelming. How the space between us no longer felt like something to protect, but something already crossed. And I let out a small breath, my eyes still on his. Then I guess that is your answer, I added quietly, and something shifted in his expression again, something warmer this time, more open, and he nodded once, a small but definite motion, like he had been waiting for exactly that. And when he spoke again, his voice carried that same quiet certainty, but now there was something else in it too, something lighter, something that felt like it belonged to this moment and nowhere else. Good, he said simply, and the words settled between us like a promise neither of us needed to question anymore. The word lingered between us, simple and quiet and yet heavier than anything else that had been said, and I felt it settle into the space we were standing in, not as an ending, but as something that was just beginning to take shape. And for a moment neither of us moved, neither of us rushed to fill the silence, because this time the silence did not need to be fixed, it was steady, comfortable in a way I had never felt with him before, and I realized my shoulders had relaxed without me noticing, the tension that had been sitting there all night finally easing, and I let out a slow breath, my eyes still locked on his. So that is it, I said quietly, not as a question but as a realization, and he tilted his head slightly, the faintest hint of something softer crossing his expression, not distant anymore, not guarded, just there, present in a way that made everything feel more real. That is it, he confirmed, his voice just as calm, just as certain, and something in my chest lifted at that, not a sudden rush, not overwhelming, but steady, like something had finally clicked into place after being out of sync for too long, and I found myself taking another small step forward without thinking, closing whatever space remained between us until it no longer felt like there was a line to cross at all. And he did not move back, did not hesitate, he just stayed, and that alone said more than anything else could have. And I let out a small breath that almost turned into a quiet laugh, the kind that comes when something that felt impossible suddenly is not. You really came all the way here for this, I said, a little more lightly now, though the weight of it was still there underneath, and his gaze flickered just slightly, something almost amused passing through it before settling again. You really sent that message, he replied, and I shook my head once, a small, helpless motion. I was not supposed to, I admitted, but there was no panic in it this time, no need to take it back, just the truth of how it started, and he studied me for a second, like he was measuring something again, but this time it felt different, less like a calculation and more like a decision he had already made. And then he said, quieter than before but no less certain, I am glad you did, and my breath caught slightly at that, the words landing in a way that made everything feel just a little bit warmer, a little bit steadier, and I nodded, a small movement, but it felt like agreement, like acceptance, like something mutual instead of one-sided, and the moment stretched again, but not in a way that felt uncertain anymore, more like something we were both standing in. Together, neither of us rushing to leave it behind, and I became aware of the open door behind me, the hallway light still spilling in, the outside world still there, waiting, but it felt distant now, like it belonged somewhere else, and without thinking too much about it, I reached back slightly and pushed the door open wider, the motion quiet but intentional, not just letting him in, but choosing it fully this time, and his eyes flicked to the movement, then back to me, something steady and warm settling there, and I held his gaze, my voice softer now but clear. You can stay, I said, and it was simple, just 4 words, but they carried everything I had not been able to say before, everything I had been too afraid to admit until now. And he did not answer right away, did not need to, because he was already here, already inside the space I had been guarding, and after a second he gave a small nod, almost subtle enough to miss, but not uncertain, not hesitant, just certain in the same quiet way he had been all night. And the air between us shifted one last time, not tense, not fragile, but settled, like something had finally found its place. And as I stood there, just a step away from him, I realized this was not the end of anything. Not really. It was just the first time neither of us was pretending anymore.